The screaming started first, sharp, panicked, and oddly refined, like the kind of scream you'd expect from someone who'd never stepped in mud a day in their life. I looked out from the barn door and nearly dropped my coffee. There, in the middle of my grazing field, surrounded by overturned champagne flutes, satin tablecloths, and pastel picnic umbrellas, stood a circle of well-dressed people, all running, tripping, and diving over folding chairs like a fire alarm had gone off at a wedding. Only it wasn't a fire. It was my bulls, all 4 of them, freshly fed and let out for their daily stretch. Horns up, tails flicking, snorting with the kind of offended energy only large animals get when something unfamiliar is in their space. They weren't angry yet, but they were curious and charging, right at the HOA officials and their so-called exclusive members-only celebration. See, I hadn't been invited. Actually, I hadn't even been told, but they'd used my land, without permission, without so much as a call, a knock, or a simple note on my mailbox. So I let the bulls out, and I stood there, watching chaos bloom in my own backyard like wildflowers. But here's the thing, this didn't start with bulls, or picnic tables, or HOA arrogance. It started 3 months ago, with an old man named Harvey. The first time I met Harvey, I was fixing the south fence line after a bad storm had torn half of it down. My gloves were soaked, my boots were caked with mud, and I'd just lost my grip on the wire spool for the 3rd time. That's when I heard a soft wheeze behind me, followed by a gravelly, "Need a hand?" I turned around and saw this wiry old man in a faded red trucker hat, khakis that looked like they hadn't been washed in a week, and a button-up shirt with more holes than buttons. He had a coil of fence wire in one hand and a rusty toolbox in the other. I didn't know it then, but Harvey was the beginning of everything. He lived down the road in a trailer that was more rust than roof. No family, no internet, no complaints, just him, his old dog, and an antique radio that played gospel hymns at 6 a.m. sharp every Sunday. We talked while we worked, and I learned more about that field and the people surrounding it in an hour than I had in the 6 years since I inherited the land from my uncle. "They're not like us," he'd said, nodding toward the distant rows of cookie-cutter homes just beyond the ridge. "Those folks don't see this land as a place. They see it as space, something to control, to polish." He wasn't wrong. A week after that storm, I got a letter on fancy paper, black ink, gold trim. It wasn't from the government or the city. It was from the HOA. They wanted to beautify the shared perimeter between their community and my property, which meant trimming back the wildflowers, mowing down the patches of native grass, and, get this, painting the fence. My fence. The one I just finished repairing. I read it twice, thinking it was a mistake. Then I saw the signature at the bottom. Rebecca Langford, HOA president. That name rang out like a fire bell in every town hall meeting. She was the woman with the wide-brimmed hats and pressed linen suits, always driving that spotless white SUV with tinted windows. If you asked the folks in town, they'd say she was ambitious. If you asked Harvey, he'd spit in the dirt and mutter something about control freaks with real estate fantasies. I didn't respond to the letter, not out of rudeness, but because it didn't ask anything. It told. It assumed. And where I come from, assumptions get you bit, either by a snake, a horse, or your neighbor's mama who heard you called her peach cobbler too wet. 2 weeks later, the flowers were gone. I woke up to the sound of gas trimmers buzzing like angry bees. I rushed down the hill and saw 2 landscapers hired by the HOA, tearing through my property line like it belonged to them. I yelled. They left. No apologies, just a shrug and a, "We're just doing what we're told." I was furious, but Harvey was calm. "You gotta play the long game," he said, sipping iced tea under my front porch. "These folks don't understand the value of what they didn't earn, but they will understand what it means to lose comfort. That's how you teach them." I didn't quite get what he meant then, but I would. Soon. Over the next month, things got worse. The HOA put up signs that read, private property, members only right on my walking trail. A family of hikers got chased off by security guards who thought they were trespassing, and worst of all, Harvey's trailer caught fire. It wasn't a big blaze, thank God, and nobody was hurt. But his dog Murphy got sick from the smoke. And when the fire marshal came around, the official report said faulty electrical wiring. But Harvey swore someone had tampered with his generator. "I saw footprints," he whispered, eyes scanning the trees like they could talk back. "Boot prints, too clean for any of the boys around here." He didn't say it, but we both thought the same thing. Rebecca Langford's clean-shoed HOA crew had been sniffing around. Harvey moved in with me after that. I gave him the guest room and a spot at the kitchen table. He brought his radio and a battered photo of his late wife. Every morning he'd feed the chickens, and every night he'd walk the fence with me. The land became our bond. And then one morning, it happened. I woke up to the sound of jazz music. Not the soft kind, the live band under a big white tent kind. I ran to the window, half-dressed, and nearly choked on my own spit. There, sprawled across the west pasture, was a full-blown high-class picnic. Tables, champagne buckets, people in wide dresses and shiny loafers, someone juggling wine bottles, and even a chocolate fountain. They'd brought a chocolate fountain to a cow field, and right there, at the head of the crowd, standing under a canvas arch with gold lettering that read, "Spring Elegance Social," was none other than Rebecca Langford. Clapping. Smiling. Toasting. That field was mine. That grass was for grazing, and she'd turned it into a damn outdoor gala. I walked outside slowly. Calm. Cold. Harvey met me by the barn. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. I nodded. He gave a sly smile and reached for the latch on the bullpen. "No more letters," he said. Then he opened the gate. The bulls walked out like royalty, calm, curious, and utterly unaware of the social etiquette they were about to trample. They moved toward the party like shadows drifting downhill. The laughter turned to confusion, then to panic. Rebecca screamed first, and as I watched her heels sink into cow patties and linen dresses flap like broken sails, something in me cracked, then settled. I didn't cheer, I didn't laugh, but I didn't stop them either, and just as my biggest bull, Duke, lowered his head and charged at the makeshift champagne table, something happened, something I didn't expect, something that changed everything. Rebecca didn't run. She didn't run. Rebecca Langford stood frozen in place, her manicured hands gripping a silver champagne flute as Duke galloped toward her. Her eyes were wide, mouth parted in disbelief, but her heels stayed planted in the grass like the roots of a tree that had never learned how to bend. And for a second, just a second, I wondered if this was going to end in blood or glory. Duke stopped inches from her. Steam puffed from his nostrils, and the tip of his horn flicked the edge of the tablecloth. A crystal bowl tumbled to the ground and shattered by Rebecca's foot. But she didn't flinch, not once. She slowly extended her hand, as if trying to calm a storm with the same grace she used to silence a noisy boardroom. Then Duke snorted, turned, and trotted away toward the fruit platter. Rebecca blinked, wobbled a little, then sat down, right there in the grass, legs curled under her like a schoolgirl at a picnic. Everyone else had scattered into the surrounding trees or back to their cars parked half a mile away. But Rebecca stayed seated, face pale and eyes glassy. I didn't know what to do, honestly. It was the last thing I expected. I'd imagined yelling, maybe a legal threat, some shouting match with HOA henchmen, but not this weird, quiet crumbling. I walked over slowly. Harvey stayed behind at the barn, leaning against the post with his arms folded like a man watching a movie he already knew the ending to. When I reached her, Rebecca was still staring at the grass, running her fingers over a crushed daisy, like it held the answers to some great mystery. "You all right?" I asked. She didn't look up, just nodded a little, then whispered something I didn't quite catch. What was that? She looked at me this time, eyes rimmed red. Not from tears, but from some deeper kind of weariness. "I thought this place was supposed to be perfect," she said. "That's what they told me. Move out here, run the HOA, keep the property values up, keep everything clean, keep it all perfect." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just stood there, awkwardly, while Duke sniffed her discarded purse and wandered off with a designer scarf in his mouth. Rebecca took a long breath and let it out slow. Then, just as quietly as before, she said, "You're right, you know. This land isn't ours." Then she got up and walked away, barefoot, her heels dangling from her fingers like abandoned swords. She didn't say anything else. She didn't threaten legal action. She didn't scream about liability or damage. She just walked back across the field and disappeared into the line of parked SUVs, past the others who stared at her like she'd just walked out of a war zone. Harvey walked up behind me, watching her go. "Well," he muttered, "that was unexpected." She didn't even raise her voice. "She didn't have to," he said. "That's the thing about people who always think they're in control. When it slips through their fingers, they don't scream, they crack." I didn't see Rebecca for 2 weeks after that. But the story of what happened, that spread like wildfire. Someone had recorded it on their phone, the moment the bulls came barreling over the hill, the screams, the scramble, the bulls sniffing wine buckets. Even the part where Rebecca sat in the grass like a woman who'd just survived a tornado. It was online by that afternoon. The clip went viral in the local Facebook groups. The HOA members were humiliated. Memes popped up. Someone printed T-shirts that read, "Send in the bulls," with a cartoon Duke holding a champagne bottle in his mouth. I didn't sell those, by the way. Someone else made money off that. I was just busy fixing the field and calming the animals. But in the aftermath, things changed. The HOA didn't bother me for a while. No more letters, no landscapers. The private property signs quietly vanished from the walking trail, and the security guards didn't show up anymore. Some people in the community even started waving when they drove past. Real waves, not those tight-lipped nods they gave when pretending I didn't exist. Then one day, a blue envelope showed up in my mailbox. No gold trim, no typed-out orders. Just a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for the lesson. Sincerely, R.L." I kept it. Still have it in the drawer where I keep the receipts for feed and fencing. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. One morning, Harvey and I were walking the fence line, inspecting the repairs and talking about nothing in particular. He was telling me a story about a woman he almost married in Louisiana when we noticed something strange. Tire tracks. Not the kind from tractors or delivery trucks. These were fresh, clean, narrow, like someone had driven a sedan up through the south end of the field in the middle of the night. We followed the tracks. They veered off near the pond, ran parallel with the tree line, then disappeared behind the old cattle shed we hadn't used in years. That's when we found it. A pile of garbage bags, 6 of them, black, tied tight, and shoved behind the shed like someone had hoped the overgrowth would swallow them whole. I opened one. Inside were empty champagne bottles, silver utensils, broken glassware, and, strangely, a soaked HOA directory book with half the pages torn out. Harvey picked up a small metal plaque from the dirt beside it. It was rusted, but you could still read the engraving. Langford Estate Appreciation Dinner 2020. He looked at me. I looked at the bags. Someone had dumped the picnic's leftovers on my land. Not just the garbage, but the memory of it. The HOA wanted it erased, buried. But why here? Why not take it to the dump like a normal person? I didn't have time to process the answer before Harvey called out from the back of the shed. You might want to see this." I followed his voice and stepped around the corner. There, spray-painted in large red letters across the back wall of the shed, were 3 words. "You'll regret this." Below it, crudely drawn in thick strokes, was a bull's head, with X's for eyes. The air went still. Harvey didn't speak for a long moment. He just stood there, squinting at the shed like maybe the words would vanish if he blinked enough times. They didn't. The paint was still wet. You could smell it, strong and sharp, like gasoline and rust. "Somebody came out here in the dark," he finally said, voice low, "and they weren't just dumping trash. They were sending a message." I stepped closer, heart pounding harder than it should have, not from fear, exactly. Not yet. But from that slow burning sensation that creeps in when something crosses a line. This wasn't about bulls anymore. This wasn't about picnics or policies. Someone wanted to hurt us or scare us, and they'd used my shed to say it loud and clear. "Think it was her?" I asked. Harvey raised an eyebrow. "Rebecca? Nah. She's too polished for this kind of dirt. But someone in her circle? Yeah, could be." We called the sheriff that afternoon. Deputy Kincaid came out in his dusty cruiser, boots dragging, notepad half used. He was a good man, but you could tell he didn't want to stir anything. The HOA donated to his annual fundraiser, sponsored the town chili cook-off. Rebecca Langford had once posed for pictures with his niece at the Easter egg hunt. He looked at the graffiti, made a few notes, then muttered, "Could be kids." I didn't argue. There was no point. The bags were hauled off, photos were taken, no promises were made. But I noticed something when he left. He didn't take the note I handed him. Didn't write down the part where someone drove onto my land, painted a threat, and drew a dead bull under it. That night, Harvey sat quiet at dinner. He barely touched his chili, just kept staring at the window like he expected someone to be watching from the tree line. "You think they're gonna come back?" I asked. "I don't think they ever left," he said. "People like this, they don't show you the first punch. They wait, they probe, and when they don't get the silence they want, they start showing teeth." That stuck with me, especially the next morning when I found one of my chickens dead by the coop. It wasn't a coyote or a fox. No feathers scattered, no signs of struggle. Just the hen, laid out like someone had placed her there. Neck twisted, eyes open. We buried her behind the barn. Harvey didn't say a word. The days passed slowly after that. The routine of the farm kept things grounded. Feed the animals, fix the fencing, patch the roof. But underneath it all, there was a tightness, like a wire pulled too taut. Then, 3 nights later, the fence was cut, not broken, not damaged by weather. Cut, snipped clean through with bolt cutters. I found it in the morning, dragging in the dirt like a ribbon. There were tracks again, this time deeper, heavy, tire ruts that circled the eastern side of the pasture. Someone had driven all the way around the property, looking for something, or warning me about what they were planning next. That evening, Harvey brought out something I hadn't seen in years, a dusty old trail cam wrapped in cloth and stored in his toolbox. "Used to use this to catch raccoons raiding my garden," he said. "Guess now we'll use it to catch raccoons in dress shoes." We set it up by the shed, hidden behind some brush, angled just right to catch anyone who came sneaking around again. I added another near the south fence line and one near the coop, just in case. And then we waited. For 5 nights, nothing happened. Then came the 6th. I woke to a strange noise, metal on wood, dull, scraping. I grabbed the flashlight and met Harvey on the porch. He was already holding the shotgun, not pointing it, just resting it across his arms like a warning. We moved slow, boots crunching over gravel, lights scanning every inch of the barnyard. And then we saw it. Someone had climbed over the gate and stuck something to the barn wall. A note, written in Sharpie on yellow paper. It read, "This is your final warning. Next time, it won't be your chicken." No signature. No name. But the meaning was clear. This was a threat, and it wasn't idle. I checked the cameras the next morning. 2 had been turned around, faces pointed up toward the sky. But one had caught a glimpse of something. It was blurry, just a partial figure near the edge of the frame. But the silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, male, dressed in a dark hoodie with something bulky in his hand. Harvey leaned over my shoulder as we watched the footage frame by frame. "See that patch on his sleeve?" he asked. I did. Barely. But it was there. A white circle with something red across it, almost like an HOA pin, I whispered. Harvey nodded. "They're not done with us." And then, before either of us could say another word, we heard the distant crack of glass shattering. We bolted out the door and found the front window of the house smashed clean through. A brick lay on the floor beneath the jagged opening, wrapped in duct tape, with a single message scribbled across it in thick, uneven handwriting. "Call off the bulls." The brick lay there like a challenge. I didn't move at first. Neither did Harvey. We both stood in the doorway, wind pushing gently through the busted window, carrying in a trail of dust and dry grass from the yard. The words on the tape looked like they'd been written in a hurry. "Call off the bulls." But the message was clear. This wasn't about the field anymore. This was personal. Harvey picked up the brick with his gloved hands and set it carefully on the table, like it might still be ticking. I swept the broken glass into a pan, heart thudding. Every crackle of the shard sounded louder than it should have. "What do they even mean by that?" I muttered. "They mean stop fighting," Harvey said. "Let 'em have the land, play nice, smile at their tea parties and pretend we didn't see what we saw." "That's not going to happen." He didn't smile, just nodded once, then walked back out onto the porch. The shotgun was never far from reach now. We made 2 more calls that day. One to the sheriff, again, and another to someone Harvey hadn't spoken to in years, his cousin Wallace. Wallace lived 2 towns over and had a reputation that rode a fine line between livestock genius and certified menace. He ran cattle on 20 acres, knew how to handle disputes the old way, and never trusted suits with clipboards. He showed up the next morning in a flatbed with 2 new bulls and a bag full of homemade beef jerky. "Figured you could use some backup," he said, spitting a sunflower seed onto the gravel. "Besides, I heard HOA's been sticking their noses where they don't belong." The bulls he brought were bigger than Duke. One had a scar over his left eye. The other had a habit of snorting every few seconds like he was warming up to storm something. We let them roam the back pasture, not to threaten, just to remind. This was still a working ranch, not a theme park. That day, Rebecca returned. Her white SUV pulled up slow, tires crunching the driveway with deliberate grace. She stepped out, wearing jeans and a green flannel shirt. No linen suit, no clipboard, no entourage. Just her. She stood at the porch and looked up at me, shielding her eyes from the sun. "I didn't authorize any of this," she said. I didn't reply. "Not yet." She took a breath. "I mean it. The threats, the graffiti, the window, that wasn't me. I came to tell you face to face." Harvey leaned against the railing. "You expect us to believe someone just took it upon themselves to launch a whole campaign without you knowing?" "I didn't say I had clean hands," she replied, voice tight. "But I didn't order the war. I started a conversation. Someone else decided to turn it into something else." I stepped forward. "Then who was it?" She hesitated, then looked out toward the pasture. "Gregory Finch." The name didn't ring a bell. "He's our vice president," she explained. "And a major donor. His father used to own half this valley before the developers came. He thinks this land should be part of our community plan. He's been pushing me for months to do something about the visual nuisance." "You mean our farm?" I said, jaw tightening. Rebecca didn't argue. "Yes, your farm." She glanced down, then pulled something from her back pocket. A flash drive. "This has everything. Emails, meeting recordings, his messages to the board. He's the one who ordered the landscapers. He's the one who told me you would fold if pushed." I didn't know about the window, or the chickens, or the brick. But I'm done protecting him. I took the drive. It felt too light to hold so much weight. Then she said, "Gregory has a meeting scheduled with the board this Saturday, at his house. He's calling it a private review, of how we'll manage the next phase. You're not supposed to know about it." "What's the next phase?" She looked up at me, her voice low and direct. "Condemnation. If they prove the field is misused or environmentally unsafe, they'll file a formal claim with the county, try to seize the land through loopholes, zoning violations, pressure from the realtors, quiet intimidation." Harvey shook his head. "Crooks in khakis." "Why are you telling us this?" I asked. Rebecca looked tired, not physically but in her spirit, like someone who'd been carrying a mask for too long. "Because I saw the bull stop," she said. "That animal had every reason to charge, and it didn't. It looked at me and walked away. And for the first time in years, I realized I don't want to be part of something that doesn't know when to stop pushing." I didn't trust her. Not completely. But I believed she was telling the truth. That night, Harvey and I sat at the kitchen table, flash drive plugged into the laptop, watching email after email, confirming every ugly thing we suspected. Gregory's name was all over it, so were phrases like strategic absorption, non-compliance case prep, and target asset conversion. They weren't just planning to take the land, they were planning to erase it. Saturday came faster than I wanted. The board meeting was at Gregory's estate, a massive property with stone gates and imported pine trees. We didn't have an invite, but Wallace had a plan. He showed up at dawn with a flatbed trailer and 2 steel pens welded to the back. "I hope y'all brought clean boots," he said, grinning under his scruffy beard. "'Cause we're about to make the kind of statement they can't unhear." The trailer gate dropped. Duke stepped up first, then the scarred bull from Wallace's herd, then a third, a younger fiery one with a brand new bell on his neck. We didn't drive to the estate through the front. We circled behind, through the old fire road, past the abandoned orchard, and down through the gully where the security cameras didn't reach. When we got close enough to hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, and the smug voices of HOA officials congratulating themselves under a white canopy, we opened the gate. The bulls didn't charge. Not at first. They strolled in slow, unbothered, majestic, like they'd been invited. Then one of them saw the food table. A horn dipped low. A chair flew backward. And the panic began. I watched it unfold from the hilltop with Harvey and Wallace. Gregory Finch leapt onto a bench, screaming at the top of his lungs. But the bulls weren't after him. Not yet. That changed when he picked up a chair and threw it, straight at Duke, and that was when the real stampede began. The chair cracked midair. It didn't even hit Duke directly, just grazed past his shoulder and landed awkwardly on a folding table. But that was enough. That was all it took. Duke reared back with a furious bellow, his massive body pivoting in the dirt as his front legs struck the ground with a thunderous thud. Gregory Finch stood there, frozen, halfway between retreat and self-righteous rage, too stubborn to run and too scared to move. And then Duke charged, straight at him. The other HOA board members were already scattering, shrieking like gulls in a storm. Wine glasses toppled, silver trays hit the ground, and a carefully stacked tower of hors d'oeuvres exploded into the grass like a food grenade. Gregory bolted. Too late. Duke barreled into the buffet table just behind him, launching him forward into a low garden fountain with a splash and a yelp that echoed through the pines. The bull snorted once, satisfied, then stomped through the rest of the spread, like a king reclaiming his castle. From our spot up on the hill, Harvey actually laughed. Not a little chuckle, a full, belly-deep laugh that shook his shoulders and made Wallace slap his knee. "Well," Wallace said, chewing his jerky, "I'd call that a successful delivery." But it wasn't just about making noise. We weren't there for revenge. This was proof. Live, undeniable. No spin footage. I was already recording everything on a drone Harvey borrowed from his nephew, and the angles were perfect. Gregory throwing the chair, the bulls reacting, the guests panicking, the chaos unfolding entirely because of a man who couldn't keep his temper. And best of all, Rebecca was there too, standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching the entire mess unravel with a look that wasn't quite smug, but definitely wasn't regretful either. After the dust settled and Gregory was helped to his feet, soggy, muddy, and coughing up pond water, security finally arrived, but the damage was done, literally and figuratively. A few officers showed up an hour later. No arrests, just questions. Harvey and I had driven down by then, calm and collected. "We just came to pick up our bulls," I said plainly. The officer raised a brow. "They yours?" "Yep. Got out through a damaged fence," I replied, handing over a picture of the snipped wire from a week before. Not the first time either. Rebecca stepped forward. "They're not pressing charges. I think we've all had enough of legal drama this year." Gregory tried to argue, red-faced, stammering, furious, but his voice was drowned out by a small crowd that had formed, neighbors, onlookers, even a few former HOA members who were already whispering about board elections and misconduct. The officers gave us a nod and left, and we loaded the bulls back onto the trailer, calm, slow, like they'd just finished a peaceful stroll through the countryside. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. 2 days later, I received a letter. Not a threat. Not a complaint. A resignation. Gregory Finch had stepped down from the HOA, effective immediately. Inside the envelope was also a check for $2,500 labeled simply property damages. I didn't cash it, not because I didn't need the money, but because it felt like accepting hush money. I taped it to the fridge as a reminder. But what followed was even more surprising. Rebecca came by again, no SUV this time. She walked from the community entrance all the way down the gravel drive in a pair of muddy boots. "I've dissolved the beautification committee," she said without preamble. "The fences are yours, the trails are yours, and the board is reviewing the policy on perimeter zones." I raised an eyebrow. "Why the change of heart?" She looked me square in the eye. "Because this was never about aesthetics. It was about power, and you showed us what happens when people forget where that power should come from." I didn't say anything, just nodded. Then, in a moment I'll never forget, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a mason jar. Inside was a sprig of wildflowers, the same kind the landscapers had mowed down that first week. "I pulled these from the ridge this morning," she said. "I figured they'd grow better where they belonged." She handed them to me and left. Things finally calmed down after that. No more spray paint, no more trash piles behind the shed. Even the trails felt lighter somehow, like the land had finally exhaled after months of being held hostage by plans, meetings, and greed. Harvey and I fixed the window. Wallace returned to his ranch. And the bulls? Well, they became local legends. People started visiting just to take pictures with them. Someone even left a fan letter taped to Duke's pen with a drawing that said HOA Slayer. But 3 weeks after the picnic ambush on a rainy Thursday morning, I noticed something odd. The fence was open again, not cut, not broken, unlatched. I followed the tracks, light tire marks, small, likely a golf cart. They led to the old tool shed near the far end of the property, and sitting just inside the doorway, placed neatly on top of a hay bale, was a leather folder. Inside, blueprints, zoning applications, and one signature at the bottom of every page, Rebecca Langford. But what caught my eye most wasn't the documents. It was the post-it note stuck to the last page. I thought we could fix things. I was wrong. The rain hadn't let up all morning. Thunder rolled low across the hills, and the wind tossed leaves across the field like warning signs. I stood in the shed, holding the folder like it was laced with dynamite. The note, those 8 words scrawled in hurried handwriting, felt heavier than the blueprints themselves. I thought we could fix things. I was wrong. I didn't know what Rebecca meant exactly, but I knew one thing. It wasn't over. Harvey and I took the folder back inside, dried it out on the kitchen table, and studied every page. The documents were real, They weren't ideas. They were implementation papers, already stamped by the county planning office. They outlined a phased development plan, starting with my west pasture and moving inward in neat little blocks labeled Proposed Residential Expansion. According to the zoning maps, my land had been quietly reassessed months ago, and the final approval signature? It was dated last week. She said she quit, I whispered, staring at her name at the bottom of each sheet. She told us she was done. Harvey sat silent, face dark. She lied. No sooner had he said it than headlights flared through the rain outside. Not one pair, three, black SUVs moving in tight formation, rolling up the drive like they owned the place. Wallace burst through the back door, soaked to the bone, red-faced and panting. "They're here," he spat. "Gregory and the real estate folks. I was at the feed store when I overheard them talking. They're going to push the plan through with or without her. Said she lost her spine and they're taking over." My fists clenched. This wasn't about laws anymore. This was theft, dressed in paperwork. We rushed out into the downpour as the SUVs stopped near the barn. The doors opened and out stepped Gregory Finch, dry under an expensive umbrella, flanked by two men in construction vests and a woman with a clipboard. He didn't even look surprised to see us. "You've had a good run," he called out, voice smooth under the rain. "But the land's been rezoned. You'll be receiving the official notice soon. I suggest you start making preparations." "You forged her signature," I snapped. He smiled like it was a compliment. "She left us no choice. Sentimentality has no place in expansion. You can't just take land that doesn't belong to you." "Oh, but we already have. You just haven't accepted it yet." And that's when I saw it. Behind the last SUV, parked at a distance, was Rebecca, sitting inside, watching. I couldn't read her expression. Was it regret or surrender? Gregory turned to the woman with the clipboard. "Mark the east side for fencing. We'll start there. I want bulldozers ready by Monday." That was it. That was the match. The storm had been gathering for weeks, but that moment lit the fuse. "And Harvey?" Harvey moved. He turned and sprinted toward the back pasture, yelling something I didn't catch. For a second I thought he'd lost it. But then I heard the low, familiar creak of the pen gate opening. Wallace's eyes widened. "Oh, hell! He's doing it!" The bulls charged, all five. The earth trembled beneath their hooves as they stampeded down the slope, rain misting off their backs, horns gleaming like drawn swords in the gray light. Gregory turned just in time to see Duke take the lead. "Get in the cars!" he screamed. But it was too late. The first SUV was tipped sideways in seconds, its alarm wailing like a siren in a riot. Men scattered, tripping over themselves in the mud. One of the real estate reps dove into a puddle, screaming about liability and lawsuits. The woman with the clipboard threw it sky high and vanished into the trees. Gregory tried to climb onto the hood of his vehicle. Duke headbutted the grill, and the whole thing lurched forward, throwing Gregory backward into a ditch. And still, the bulls weren't done. They tore through every signpost, stomped over the surveying markers, and scattered the documents like confetti across the soaked earth. Harvey stood at the edge of the storm, drenched in rain, arms raised like a conductor directing an orchestra of chaos. But through all the noise, I saw her. Rebecca. She'd stepped out of the SUV now, face pale, umbrella forgotten at her side. She looked at me. I looked back, and in that long, silent moment, I saw something change in her. She pulled out her phone, made a call. A minute later, the county deputy's radio chirped. "New information just came in," he muttered, reading his screen. "The rezoning application's been flagged, forgery suspected. We're halting everything pending a full investigation." Gregory's voice, soaked and desperate, rose from the ditch. "No! That land is already ours! That paper's signed!" But the deputy shook his head. "Not anymore." Gregory was hauled to his feet, cuffed, stuffed into the back of a cruiser, still barking about empires and profit margins. Rebecca turned to me, walked through the mud, no umbrella, no flinching. "I was scared," she said. I thought if I quit, they'd just move on. I didn't realize quitting gave them power. Not you. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The bulls returned slowly, calm now, like they knew the job was done. Duke gave one final snort and walked back into the pasture on his own. 3 days later, the HOA disbanded. Officially, the board resigned. The development deal collapsed under legal scrutiny, and Gregory, charged with fraud, trespassing, and malicious intent to seize private property. But that's not the wild part. The wild part? They tried to make Duke the town mascot. We said no. He earned his peace. So now he stands in the pasture each morning, grazing beneath the wide Texas sky. Unbothered, untouchable. And as for me? I walk the trail again. No signs, no fences, just wildflowers growing free.